Welcome everyone to the Awards Entry Writing Skills webinar. It's great to see so many of you registered this morning, which is a great indication too of the interest in the awards this year. A bit of a shout out to our sponsors, because the awards wouldn't be possible this year without their generous support. So they're Facebook, Google, Lumo, Magnite, MediaWorks, Nielsen, Trade Me and TVNZ. This morning, we're excited to have James Butcher, the GM of Digital FCB, facilitating this morning's session with our panel of experts. James is also the chair of the Agency Council for the IABNZ. All of whom our experts this morning are leading practitioners, and they're either experts in writing entries or in awards judging. So thanks very much to James, David, Q, Sebastian and Simon for your time and expertise in what's going to be a great session this morning. But before I hand over to James, just a quick reminder to check each of the 5 categories and awards with within each of those categories, as we have a number of new awards this year, including Best in Show for the very first time. And also lastly, entries close 3 weeks tomorrow on Friday the 2nd of October. And just a reminder to each of you that James is going to be taking questions at the end of the session. So please send us your question in the question box throughout the session. So over to you, James, and the panelists.
Thank you, Jill. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well and safe wherever you may be working from or dialing in from. Appreciate you taking the time out to join us this morning. As Jill mentioned, we've got a fantastic panel of experts, and we'll be introducing them shortly. But I do encourage you to submit your questions, submit your thoughts, and we will have an opportunity to get to those at the end of the session. As Jill mentioned, the IAB Awards is it's a fantastic opportunity for us to celebrate the great work that goes on in this industry. And I did want to reiterate that this really is about the great work. You know, awards are nothing without the work behind them. But having said that, there is an art to how we talk about great work, and certainly how we construct that great work into an award entry, and how we make it stand out and succeed. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panel and allow them to quickly perhaps introduce themselves. So David McCallen from OMD.
Morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Yeah, I'm David McCallen, head up strategy for OMD.
Thank you. Sebastian from Verizon Media, joining us from Australia, I believe.
Absolutely, from Sydney. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time this morning. I look after the native ad product across New Zealand and Australia.
Thank you. And then we have Simon Bird from PhD.
Morning, everyone. Simon Bird, as James just said, Group Head of Strategy and Measurement at PhD Media.
And then finally, we have Qassem, otherwise known as Q, joining us from FCB.
Good morning, everybody. Head of Data and Tech at FCB. Good to see some familiar names on the line this morning.
Good to see you still haven't managed to make your way to a barber as well, Q. Anyway, let's kick off. And David, I'm actually going to throw this one to you as a first one. But in regards to awards writing and awards entry, where do you actually begin, and what are some of the important considerations in regards to starting the process?
Cool, thanks, James. I think, well, the first thing you've got to do is just work out and decide whether you actually have an award-worthy paper. I know that seems really maybe a bit of a facile beginning, but it's actually most critical. I think a lot of the time, what you can feel within a business is a really strong story and a really strong sort of paper may not actually necessarily, you know how really good it is, but you need to understand, you know, is it a sellable story? Is it award worthy in the eyes of other people? And will you be able to construct and build a representation of your work that people are really going to understand, know and understand? So you know, there's a number of different ways to do this. And I think every agency will probably have a slightly more nuanced version of this, but certainly the way that we focus on it is, you know, very classically, what's your long list? What are all the list of contenders that you might be considering? Your long list is not your final list. You should expect to be really, really whittling it down and killing some babies, basically. I know it's a brutal thing to say, but you know, you've got to be in that mindset. So yeah, the process that we would go through is certainly creating a long list. We would have working sessions where we kind of stress test the story. What does the story look like? What are the angles into the story that we want to tell? What are the proof points? Why do we think it's award worthy? And we would do that kind of as a community. And then you kind of go through a series of processes. Sometimes the reality is I find that you have to kind of write out a treatment for the story and actually put it down on paper and see how that feels and that process feels. To actually really kind of get to that point. Other times you can kind of, you know, accept or reject the paper early on. But once you've got that kind of, that you've gone from that long list into I guess your first short list, what we will then do is try and then engage client in terms of, this is the story we want to tell. These are the evidential proof points that we feel are necessary. How does everyone feel about that? And you can then kind of do a feasibility test, I guess, on whether clients are going to be able to support you with the information, or you actually have that information available. And all of this to me is just a kind of a first run. It's just, you know, the process you'll go through over the first kind of week or so, first few days. And once you've kind of got that sort of structured narrative approach and you're confident that the data is there, then you can go to almost like your final sort of shortlist. I find personally, I don't know, a lot of the data for IAB, you know, you probably will hold within your own agencies or very kind of close to you, but then there is also always a reliance on client data and other sort of third-party data points. What I've sort of learned the hard way over the years is it's so important, even if you've got a really kind of proactive partnered client relationship, it's really, really important to get to them early. It's really, really important to explain your story to them early, because if you get into this cycle of just fishing for data and going backwards and forwards, you know, you're going to create a massive problem, A, with your client relationship, but B, in terms of a backlog of information. So I've learned to try and get the story kind of in my mind clear really, really quickly, all of the data points that I feel support that story, submit that to the client. Then that gives them the opportunity to either dismiss the story or actually go and find other supporting proof points or actually build on it, sort of thing. So those are the kind of steps that I would go through. So yeah, to summarize, long list, do the treatments. What's the elevator pitch of the story? Is it award worthy? Check in with people, get kind of references and push back, be honest about that. Be prepared to let go of things that you really love and recognize that the broader world needs to understand the story. And then be as upfront, as quick as possible with the client on the story and the data that you've got. Those are some of my starting points.
I like what you, I'll slightly change the language and say perhaps kill your darlings, but I certainly recognise that as an important part of that process, and that can be a really hard thing to do. The other thing I was hearing from you there is, unlike perhaps a university assignment, the importance of starting really early, right? Because going through that process really late is just not going to be possible, right? Simon or Sebastian or Q, was there anything you'd like to add to what David's just shared there?
No, I think that's, I would just building on that point you just reiterated, starting early is really key. A big part of winning awards is the iteration, write it out. As David said, get it sense checked by someone else, because we all think our own work's better than sometimes it can be. And I think you said this, David, you might not have, is make sure the client's happy for it to be entered, because it's a real shame when you waste a lot of time and energy, and then the client doesn't want the information shared. So that's another key step as well. But yeah, starting early is a really key one.
It sounds like you've had some experience with that there, Simon.
Wasted a lot of time making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
I think so. So very quickly, you know, with IAB, I think it's a 1,200 word count. That's a very tight word count. You can never stop writing and rewriting. Obviously, there's a point where you've got to stop tinkering, but genuinely, the earlier you start, the more you should prepare yourself to go through 3, 4, even 5 rounds. Some of the best papers, you'd be amazed how many times they are written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. When you've got such a tight word count, that, you know, giving yourself time to get to that focus and that clarity is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, I think you were very clear on the process and the systems to go through. That piece around justification and validation, is this piece of work actually good enough in a competitive landscape, is really important to understand. But the other piece to recall for everybody is if you don't go through this process, everybody else is. This is a really competitive award. We're going to see dozens and hundreds of entries for every category, which means the importance of getting started early can't be understated. Everybody else is going to start early, and if you don't, even if your work is exceptional, you've put yourself on the back foot to begin with.
Yeah.
If only 3 weeks left, right? So if you haven't started, today's a good day.
You're already too late.
And look, one of the things that you kind of touched on in what you were sharing there, David, was kind of this concept of the story arc and building that up, right? And we know that's a really important part of formulating a really strong award. Is there any tips or advice that you could provide around how you identify and get that right early or up front?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things to touch on here. The tips and the tricks to get to well, first of all, what do we mean by a story arc? Let's go there. Or it's maybe not an arc. Again, with 1,200 words, it's, you are telling a story with these awards, and every story needs kind of, structure and form, and it kind of really needs to have a clear sense of what it is and what it's about. There's the old adage of, like, who is it that said there's only 7 stories, like the hero's return and things like that. But awards papers are similar. Awards papers tend to have like similar kind of tropes that kind of keep coming up, like the groundbreaking kind of innovation, or David versus Goliath. Nobody thought we could do it, but we did. Or, the hacked universe, or whatever. There's all sorts of different kind of tropes that will come through. It's really important, I guess, for papers like this. I think I'd be interesting to ask the panel, but for me personally, as a strategist, when you look at these kind of specialist award shows, is the quality of the work that the specialists do is immense. But it's very much focused in on the area of speciality and specialism. And what I find a lot of people do, certainly in digital and data landscape, is they don't realize how big their work is, or how important or significant it is as part of a bigger picture. So it's important to sometimes get yourself out of the job that you've done as an individual and think in a broader sense of, well, what did that piece of work contribute to, and what's the higher level conversation or the higher level idea that you were working to. So many times I work with guys in my teams, and they'll be talking about, yeah, but look at this metric, or look at this one piece of thing that we've done. And it's like, yes, you've done brilliantly here, but the bigger story is, fundamental change for a client, or, so it's important to see your work in the context of a broader narrative and a broader story. So that's why we're sort of talking about sort of the story and the importance of that. The other thing is, when you've got such a tight word count, you need some kind of spine or reference point to keep you focused on how you want to tell the story. We shouldn't ever enter awards writing and just go, I'm filling that section now, I'm filling that section now, I'm filling that section. There has to be a flow, there has to be a conversation between the sections. The quicker you can get people to understand the story that you might be telling, the easier it is to persuade them of the value of that story later on. Oh, so this is a story for David versus Goliath, the small guys taking on the big guys. So I'm going to be looking for all of these reference points, and I'm going to be sort of checking that and validating that. You don't want people kind of confused even halfway through. They're getting lots of good information, but they don't really know where to place that information. So the story is really important. It's a really kind of critical thing to kind of connect the sections to, and to be really clear, what's your elevator pitch? What's the core idea that you're linking to? With a greater word count, you might have a lot more fun with a story, and you might be able to take sort of flights of fancy and put a bit more humor in and put other narrative devices in. But for the IAB awards, it's just, step outside of the key metrics, think about the bigger picture, think about what's the story you want people to connect with, and then keep organizing and structuring your points and your data to that, I think is, really critical.
Look, I think you raised a really interesting point there around the specialism and some of those kind of really specialist entries, and how does that connect to telling a bigger or painting a bigger picture. Sebastian or Q, and apologies for putting you into kind of specialist buckets, but you might have some interesting thoughts to add to that.
Yeah, there's definitely some pieces there. It reminded me very much of an entry I wrote nearly 10 years ago for a Best Use of Search award, where in my mind, the working through of all I did was implement some best practice for an airline, this port to this port, and just analyze and specifically target on that. But what that actually meant for the client and the way that changed their business is ports that weren't profitable became profitable. And that as a change for the business itself is a really different piece to that specialist point of view of just a single piece. It's really, really important to connect it back up, especially when somebody like David is coming through as a chief strategy officer, whose entire job is to pull all the pictures together. And if you're looking at your entry and your campaign as a specialist, somebody who's been hands in tools as their career and their piece of work, to make sure you pull up and talk to somebody at that level if you need to make sure you can understand the impact on the business as a whole. Because one of the things that will help you stand out more than anything else is to connect the specialist and the piece of work you do to what the impact on the business is. It makes a huge difference as a judge sitting in a darkened room like this. When I've got one piece that is a good piece of work and one that is a good piece of work that changed the business, it's really easy to award this second one, even though the first one might have done just as much. It just didn't communicate it properly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's why sometimes it's nice to have people who aren't directly or weren't directly involved in delivering the work as part of the process, because if you are so invested in it and put your blood, sweat, and tears into the process, sometimes you're over invested in telling details that don't really matter to somebody at the level, I guess, of the award you're writing. And then the other point that I think David mentioned as well was just make it fun, right? Like boring entries are boring entries. Anybody who's judged knows you have like up to 12, 20 entries to read through at a given time. And if it's dry and just boring, it's not going to be great. You know what I mean? You're not giving yourself the best opportunity there. And so a little empathy there and making it an entertaining read and like telling that story in a way that people want to understand it and go like, oh man, that was, you know, clever. And, you know, keep people reading, keep them interested so they're not just skimming through and looking for some highlights.
Yeah. Just touching on that, Q, is it's that concept of the halo effect. You know, like if you're presenting to people open with a joke, like make people like you straight away, and then that will carry you through. We're emotional entities. That will carry you through a presentation, and it's the same with an awards paper. Make it an enjoyable thing to read. Genuinely, judges will be sort of slightly duped by that, and it will carry you through maybe some of the weaker sort of elements. So, you know, really know what your story is, know what your tone is, know the angle you're going to take, and how you're going to make this rewarding for the judge. Yeah,
definitely. I might you talk about story a lot all the way through, David. I might just put a specialist lens on that, if I might. Specialist lens you've got there is a strategy lens. For somebody a bit more technical, think of it as a marketing campaign for your work. Right? Like you're so connected to your work, you understand it intimately. Think of all the times you've had a client not fully able to explain the brief to you and not fully be able to explain the product. Right now, as you're going through an award entry process, you're the client. If you can't fully and clearly explain it, no, your judge is not going to be able to understand the marketing campaign that you are putting forward for the work.
Hey guys, just a reminder to everybody on the call, there is the opportunity to submit questions. So we actually haven't had any come through yet, but please do. Simon, I'd love to throw over to you, mate, because we've kind of spoken a little bit about kind of how do we start the process. We've kind of spoken a little bit about identifying the right story arc, etc. But I'd love to hear from you around what some of the things or some of the tips or processes that you go through in terms of the actual construction of the award and the actual act of writing out that entry.
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, a lot of that, the points made are really crucial. And I think, as David said earlier, a lot of the advice sounds like common sense. And to that point, there's no right way to write an entry, but there are wrong ways. So what you're basically going to hear today is mistakes to avoid rather than here's how to write a winning award. The first thing I think, if you can't write very well, and that's not a criticism, because a lot of people that are deeply technical sometimes struggle to put their own technology or application of it in context. Find someone who can write well and partner up with them. And there's no shame in that. We do that a lot at PhD. Another thing is write the story out when the campaign's being developed. It's really difficult a year after the campaign went live to remember all the details of what happened. So sketching out just the rough, what did we do? What was the brief? What were the metrics? Just do that when it goes to market, so you can recall the details a little bit easier. We've started talking about writing it, or spoken about writing early. Only 3 weeks left. Ideally, you would have already started, but if you haven't, as Q said, start today. This was a point that was raised as well, really important. Get someone who doesn't know the work or doesn't know the technology to help you put it in context. As we were saying before, the story isn't the technology, the story is the application of the technology. And sometimes when you get really close to it, you can be obsessed by the tools rather than what the tools allowed you to do. But someone who doesn't know the work or the technology will help actually help you answer the question of, does it actually make sense to someone who doesn't have your level of technical expertise? Because not all the judges will know everything as well as you might. And just questions like, does it sound impressive? Is a judge going to find this interesting? Does the problem sound hard? That's another big one. David and I talk about this quite a lot, coming back to the point about stories. The dramatization of the problem is kind of important as well. Otherwise, the solution can sound rather sort of like hygiene. So really hammer home how difficult the problem that you ended up solving is. And the last bit, which again sounds like real common sense, get someone to spell check, because nothing says I don't really care about this award very much, like bad punctuation or bad spelling. So those are some of the key things that I think are important when you're starting to write an award.
I think that there's some really good advice in there, and particularly you kind of touched on, it needs to make sense, right? And it needs to demonstrate the quality and the value of the work. And if that isn't easily understandable from someone else within your agency, it's certainly not going to be understandable from a judge outside of the agency. So I think there's a lot of good advice in that. Is there anyone else that would like to add any kind of further thoughts to that?
I'd like to say, definitely, as we start to get into some of the more technical questions, there's an entire series of awards and a section of awards for best use of channel, best use of data, and for best salesperson within a whole bunch of different channel-specific pieces. Avoid acronyms. It's entirely likely that the people who are going to be judging are not going to have the expertise that you do in those channels and in those technologies. In fact, it's almost certain, because if they did have the expertise, they'd be entering as well. So please make sure that everything you say is written in plain English. Don't say CTR, say click-through rate. That's an obvious example. But especially if you're going into ad ops and you're talking about the difference between a publisher side and an ad server and an advertiser ad server, make sure that you explain why there's a difference and what the detail is in really plain, simple language.
I think, sorry, that's a really good, just the simple concept of make it as easy as possible. I think Q's touched on that, Simon's touched on it, you've touched on it. Make it as easy as possible for the judge, whoever they may be, to to understand, like, and reward, you know, your work.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing that I've seen occasionally is generic work. There was a couple of years ago, I was judging an award in Australia. Thankfully, obviously, the New Zealanders are much better than this. And I had a series of 8 entries of the 12 were just a social video campaign. That's it. There was nothing else they did. We made a social video, and it was very nice, and it was very effective, which is wonderful. And for the client, it was probably a really wonderful piece. But if they'd gone through the process that David talked about earlier, there is no way that would have passed through a validation and justification stage.
Right. And we're just starting to get a few questions in, so thanks, guys. And I might actually throw to one of them now, because there's a couple coming through on the same theme, which is, we're talking a lot about kind of entry in relation to great work, right? From the perspective of a campaign or marketing or advertising or whatever it might be. How do you see the advice that you guys are sharing translating into an award, which might be around individual excellence, or it might be around, in particular for these IOB awards, might be around a particular product? Is there any kind of difference to what you guys have shared around how you'd go through the process and and the importance around how you actually construct that award entry that anyone would like to reference?
I think conceptually it's still the same. You've still got to write a award that's interesting to read. You've got to say why you're a good salesperson, or why this piece of technology sounds interesting to someone who isn't selling the technology. Dramatize the problem you solved, or the solution you developed. The concepts remain the same across awards, across categories, I believe.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
Go, David.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think, it probably does sound like we're talking more about campaign things, but there's nothing in that, like, even if you're talking about individuals, they still have a story. You know, the reason that you want to celebrate them and hold them up is because they've operated in a context which was, you know, as Simon was saying, was possibly ridiculously difficult or unique or very challenging. So, and you still need to create empathy with that person through the awards paper. So you need to think of a story structure and the spine of that narrative. It's not just a list of actions taken by an individual. It's, you know, there's a real quality that you need to bring there. So yeah, definitively, I think all of the key things that we've touched on, you know, you might nuance them slightly, but as kind of structural building blocks or consideration points, I feel they're the same.
I think that's a key word, David, context. Like, what is the context you're operating in? Not what you did as a salesperson. What does the industry do? And what are the things that everybody's doing the same? And what did you do that is different? Or what did you bring to the table that no one hasn't thought of, done before? So the context is really crucial that it comes out in the story.
Yeah, I've been really cautious and careful to use the word work instead of campaign, because the work that a sales manager does, or the work that an individual AdOps lead does, or the work that a team does, it's not about the campaign delivery, but it is still the same construct. You've delivered this amazing piece of work across a year. It's probably harder as an individual than as a campaign. But you've delivered this work for a year. How does that translate into a story or into a marketing campaign about that work? How do you make it interesting for the judges and distinctive and something that stands out and is entertaining to read?
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing I'll add into that is just spell it out, right? Like, for a lot of people don't know what your mate's job is and what he's meant to do and what's in his role and what's not. And a laundry list of achievements without saying, you know, like, this was above and beyond or different or whatever, for whatever reason, doesn't get people there. You really need to, like, convey why you think, you know, all of these things have made this person excellent or, you know, worth recognition, not just what they've done.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Moving on to kind of data points, right? Particularly in relation to identifying or how you kind of demonstrate the success, and looking at how do we kind of measure and capture that success through data points. Q, what do you think are some important consideration in identifying the right data points or the right points of measurement and their role in supporting the entry?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing is the McNamara fallacy concept, right? Like, but there's a concept of there are measures that are readily available and easy to use for a particular channel or a type of campaign, particularly in digital. It doesn't mean they're the right metric. You know, if the story is the important piece there, right? So as you set up your challenge, there are data points that you can use to support why that challenge is difficult, right? But not only that, once you've described a challenge and you started telling that story about what that person or the campaign has achieved, having data that directly supports the challenge that you've set up is important. If your challenge is sales and you tell me about the click-through rate, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, depending on the narrative and what you set up, you need to make sure that each of those data points specifically ladders back up. And then I guess one of the things that sets entries apart, particularly in condensed word count entries or entries more focused on innovation than efficacy, are the concept of, you know, having gone through and, you know, thought about holes that someone could poke in entries, because as a judge, I see that as the job in many cases. So I'm reading through an entry, looking for holes and things that don't quite sound right, or metrics that don't ladder up, or is that sales increase just because it's January and their sales always go up in January, you know? So try and think through the holes that people could try and poke in it or question, you know, and then make sure that you're addressing those points. So as soon as the doubt may spring into the judge's mind, you've answered it and alleviated that by including, you know, the right data to get them across the line.
Simon.
I think that's a really key point. It happens more often than you would think, that the objectives that you talk about in section 1 are not the same ones that are used as evidence. And further to that, less is always more. Like a shopping list of data points and objectives and a shopping list and evidence don't make the award sound stronger. They make it sound weaker. Q's points bang on. Just be really clear and preferably single-minded. We're one objective. And did we achieve it? And there's no shame in going, yep, we sold more cars because it's a new model or whatever it might be. Talk about that, but then put it in context to a competitor or 4 years ago when the other new model came out or something like that. That comes up quite a lot as well. Judges typically are quite experienced. They've worked on lots of categories. So as Q said, they know if you're selling, I don't know, ice cream or beer, you're going to be selling more in summer. But put it in context. It is something that you should address before the judges do.
Somebody once taught me in my sort of strategy journey, like the way he talked about it was with strategy, and I think it's the same with awards, which is the more content you have in a strategy, the less confident you are of your strategy. The more we throw into a deck and the more explanation and the more reference points, it's signaling that we're not really confident what we're doing. So we're just trying to bolster that with information, perspectives and things like that. The more confident you are, the more singular you're going to be and the more simple you're going to be. And it's the same with awards. The more confident you are about your objective, what you set out to do, why it's an award-winning paper, the more confident you are, you should find, the less you almost need to bring in to prove it. Well, maybe not the less, or maybe that's not quite exactly the right word, but I think you get my point.
You're trying to do one thread all the way from here's the problem, here's the execution, here's why that was the right execution, and here's the results. Is the one piece. It's not 4 different metrics and all of them are justified and measured by different elements of the campaign. Absolutely.
Great. Look, I'm going to throw this open to all of you, actually, because you've all got a lot of experience in terms of judging awards. And also a question has come in, which kind of speaks to this one as well. But what do you guys think separates a winning award from the rest? And to answer Sarah's question, have you guys picked up any kind of common themes or styles when it comes to kind of winning awards? And let's start with you, David.
Themes. Definitively, the papers that win are the easiest, more fun, enjoyable papers to win. I mean, it's whether you're talking specialist or whether you're talking kind of more, creative campaigns and things like that. I don't know why I went straight to when Harry met Sally. You had me at hello or whatever. No, that's not. What is it? What? God, I'm getting all my rom-coms muddled up. Jerry Maguire. The first line, like the way you open, the way you begin, is so critical. Like I would contend that most award-winning papers open really strong, like literally with the very first line. And if it's not the first line, it's the first 2 lines. Because as we talked about before, that halo effect, Q reference that judges may have 12 to 20 papers to go through. And these are technical papers, a lot of them. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of rational kind of constructs in them. Just if you can make a judge start reading that paper going, oh, this is interesting, like it will carry you through a long, long way. And if you can, you can open by saying this paper is going to stand out. We have the confidence to open strong and we believe this paper should stand out, then that will carry you a long way. So I don't know if it's a trope or a theme, but definitively the opening and the concept of knowing how that paper will sit amongst all of the other papers and trying to elevate it is, it's really key.
Yeah, it's very challenging to say, here's a theme that works, because it is quite diverse and quite broad. I can tell you a few themes that don't work, however. If you're generic, if I've got 4 entries which say exactly the same thing in exactly the same category with the same work behind it, none of them are worth winning. Because if they were, then there wouldn't be 4 of them, as an example. The other ones that don't work are those which are pure stats. we did this and we saw 3% better. We did this and we got 12% more than somebody else. We spent 20% more money than last year. None of those things are able to stand out. There's some beautiful work that we've done across Q2 where we as Verizon Media, we introduced and hosted a whole bunch of webinars. And of all of the 14 or something we did, the one thing that stood out to me more than anything else is a single phrase where we're talking about how to stand out and how to be good. And a presenter, Maz Varelli, said the best line I've ever heard. As a judge, if we apply this into this case, it's not my job to be interested. It's your job to be interesting. And that's something that really needs to apply into this particular category or into awards in general, because we're going to be reading a dozen or 20 awards, and the very first ones that you'll come back to are the ones that are interesting.
It's a great line, Sebastian. I'll give you that. Simon, anything you wanted to add, mate?
Not really. I mean, it's all the things we've been talking about is what makes an award-worthy campaign. I mean, firstly, the work's got to be good, and then it's got to be well presented. I don't think there are themes. If you read lots of winning papers, it's clear they're written by different people. They are written by different people, and everyone's got different styles. Some people are funny, some people are some more prosaic. There's no one way to do it. It's just avoid all the mistakes, have good work, avoid all the mistakes, have the right evidence. And as I said before, it's okay if you can't write very well, find someone who can and get them to help you. And it's actually really sad and this happens every year in every awards, you see great work, badly written, and you're like, you know what, I want to give this an award, but it's just so badly presented and you can't, and you feel sorry for the people. So yeah, it's more all the things we've been talking go mixed together, produce awards.
Yeah.
Q, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
It just strikes me how similar, like all the things we're talking about, right? For the same way you make good ads, you know, it's like be simple, be single-minded, don't faff about, be distinctive, have your own kind of style, whether it be entertaining or whatever that might be. And it's as much like is there a common theme to a good ad or a good brand? You know what I mean? It's like, well, there are a few different ways you can kind of tackle that, but there are some common elements that stretch across all of them.
You just touched on something there around being distinctive. Is there any advice that you guys would have on being distinctive and how do you stand out really effectively? Q,
I'll get another one not to do. Don't use a font that's really hard to read. That's another really annoying one for a judge. Don't use a weird font to try and look distinctive. Just make it hard to read.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that's one thing. I don't know, the awards portals now is increasingly digital, how much you'll be able to use your own font, but that used to be one way that you'd notice agencies would differentiate or distinguish, right, in a quite benign way, but nonetheless, you could see the same font across different entries, and it's not Arial or Times New Roman, you know, it's still very clear, but it was even a break on the eyes from reading the same font in the same points, you know, over the whole entry. So yeah, I guess little things like that, readability, that style, but again, that's almost finding ways to innovate or delineate or distinguish yourself from the pack in interesting ways fit to the medium or the channel, right? But here the medium is an award entry, whether it's going to be written and printed and delivered or done through the portal as this one in a digital format. There you can find cute little ways. And sometimes that finesse goes a lot farther. You know, I talk about this in terms of data often, but great data presented poorly will not resonate. You know, people will pick up your margin mistakes or a typo before they even consider the numbers underneath it. And I think awards are quite similar. You know, some of the awards force portal, you can indent differently, the way you do bullets, the way you can pull through bolding, the little, you know, things that you need to do to make it visually readable and I guess valuable for a judge are all little things not to understate, I suppose.
Yeah,
Dave, Sebastian, so anything to add to that, mate?
I was just going to say the idea of the award entry being a marketing campaign for your work has come up a couple of times. Q just mentioned it, David and I talked about it briefly earlier. And I think that's a really appropriate analogy. Make sure that all the things you would do to build a good marketing campaign are included in your communication around the award. Is it distinctive? Is it specific? Is it clear? And most of all, is it backed out of good work? Is it a good product that you're marketing as well? Is the single most important piece. But you can assume everyone who's entering has a good product, has a good campaign and good work.
A few of you guys have touched on as much advice about what not to do as advice around what to do when constructing an award. David, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen through your experience in judging that, you know, that you'd share and advise around people to avoid?
Without just going over sort of inverting all of the points that we sort of made before, I mean, there's so many, there are so many sort of little sort of tiny mistakes. Even Q just point just there about, you know, typos and things like that. There's such, you know, there's such minor things, but they do sort of just jar people. I mean, the common mistakes to avoid, other than just not having clear sense of what your story is. I think the things that I really kind of tune into are correlation, causality kind of data elements sort of thing. And it depends. I mean, some judges are quite generous and some are very cynical. I wouldn't say I'm very cynical, but I'm definitely on the, you know, I'll take a chisel to a paper a little bit. I'm not cynical, Simon, but no, but a lot of time people will just put data and information into a paper and it's not really, because it feels associative. It feels like it's to do with the story, but it isn't necessarily. So you kind of get presented information, and I'm sitting there going, well, I think Simon actually touched on earlier, like a new car launch. You know, I would expect a new product to do relatively well if it's against a zero baseline. You know, so don't just tell me that you wanted 10,000 units sold and you sold 15,000 units, because I don't have any context for that, and I'm going to say it doesn't mean anything to me. You've set your own targets and you've beaten your own targets. To me, that means you're not very good at setting targets, not that you've sold really good, you know, you sold really well. So this is a rambling way of just saying, I guess the most common mistake that I really tune into is know what the data is telling you and know that it is actually a valid, powerful, potent piece of data, and not just something that you're just putting in front of me because you think it's good. I'm going to try and look for reasons why it probably isn't. You need to make that bulletproof. So yeah, I guess objectives linked to results is possibly the biggest, most common mistake that I kind of tune into.
It's not setting big targets, David. As an old sales guy, it's an official technique called sandbagging. And it's something that we
but that works internally. That works for you and your own bonuses and things like that. That doesn't work. That doesn't work for a judge who doesn't. You know, I'm not paying you. So, you know, do you know what I mean? I think I think you get the point. Yeah,
of course.
It looks post-rationalized. We sold 15 grand. Let's say the target was 10.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really aggravates me, and it comes down to how well awards are written, is you see the same information with slightly different words in the summary, the challenge, the insight, the strategy, and the execution. And that's just come back to the first point David said. It's not a story. That's just information that you put in each box that hits the word count. And that's one of my real pet peeves, because it just says you don't care about the entry, no matter how good the work is.
I'm going to go into we've had a question submitted here, which I think is a brilliant question. It's come from Sarah Gill. I'm just going to read it out verbatim. Talking about David versus Goliath, I'm considering submitting an entry for a client of mine in the new startup category. Someone like me, a mum providing online marketing and website services without a team. Would it even be worth me submitting an entry? Sebastian? Yeah. Or anybody?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've done, I'm aware the IAB have done a lot in the writing of these awards, is to make them broader and more inclusive. They're intended to be able to have a small startup sole trader compete with somebody like O&D. And David, you might not like hearing me say that.
No, we need it. We need everybody, and yeah.
Absolutely. And so there's been a lot of effort and emphasis on the awards to make sure that they can incorporate and be awarded for somebody like yourself, Sarah. It's probably a little bit harder for you because you don't have somebody like Dave actually sitting there and going through the culling process and making sure the story is all there. But if you take away the guidance and the suggestions and the tips, you'll leave with a really strong possibility to compete, and it's absolutely worth your time.
Hugh, I know you've got some thoughts on this, mate. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's just like we talk about playing up the challenge and being personable and kind of bringing through that tone. Do that in the entry. Being a single individual, kind of without a big agency, going up against a big networks for a new startup is part of the challenge, right? And again, judges are as emotional, if not more, than they are rational, even when they're judging awards. And so if you can appeal to that in the same way David's point around opening on a joke, if you appeal to somebody's humanity and get them to empathize a little bit and want to back you and be on your side, then it'll help you in the entry process. So I would not shy away from that as a weakness, but own it as a strength. And then you were able to deliver the results. Just fight that.
Yeah, it's definitely a distinctive entry.
I think that the key point there would be phone a friend, get someone else not close to the work, and get them to help you write it. Is it interesting? Does it make sense to them? That's the hardest thing for smaller agencies or sole traders is finding somebody to help write.
Yeah, you should be. There should be networks that you might be able to sort of tap into, and find a supportive voice and a critical voice, because you probably will need both for a paper like this. There is, the only caveat that I would put, because I definitively don't think the situation is a reason not to enter, and as Q said, it can be a strength in the paper. You still have to be conscious of, is the work a benchmark of some sorts? Is it still award-worthy work? The context of your delivery isn't the sole reason why that work will become award-worthy. There still needs to be sort of value and merit in the story that you want to tell, beyond your context. But personally, I would say, please go for it. It'd be great to see.
And also, award writing is a skill you develop. So enter it this year, you might not win. Enter it next year, you get slightly better. Enter it the year after, you get slightly better. It takes time to get good at writing awards, and the only way to get good at it is to do it.
So really, I've done that this year in a couple of awards. I know that they're not particularly great, but I've done them because they're difficult papers to write. And so I've forced myself to just go through the whole process, knowing that next year or the year after, as Simon says, I might land it,
You'll get there, David.
I will one day.
I'll probably add my own little bit of advice to that as well, is have a look at some of the work that's won awards in the past, and not just locally, but there's a huge amount of awards shows globally, and have a look at some of the submissions and some of the case studies that support that, and it can give you a sort of a real good flavour in terms of the framework of how winning work stories are told, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point, James. I was thinking about that earlier, just in the context, we talk about make sure the work is good, and it has to be good work. To know what is good work, or, at least like award-worthy work, you kind of have to follow the work, right? Like you have to kind of know what's out there, know what other people are doing, know what's won in the past, what other agencies have been up to truly understand if it's innovative. I can't tell you how many times an award entry says the first time in New Zealand for whatever it's talking about. And sometimes that's bullshit, frankly. But other times, the only way you know that is by having your finger on the pulse and a good enough gauge of what the bar or the benchmark is of work across the, at least local market. If not, when you're applying to regional or global awards, a bit of what's happening at that level. So just, keep your head up and into the work, and it'll help you understand both how and when your own work is award worthy, but also perhaps what elements of it is worth noting or worth, recognizing as you go through and tell that story.
Sebastian, you look like you might have wanted to add something to that, or?
I was just going to say, if you haven't been keeping abreast of the work and understanding what's winning awards and what's not, there's a wonderful series on YouTube where Mark Ritson has actually gone through the last 50 years of the FEs and picked out 10 campaigns and explained why they won and all the detail around it, which I just really enjoyed watching that series.
And I guess, look, I just kind of wanted to reiterate, this advice, or these recommendations that the panel are making are absolutely applicable to awards which are to do with individual excellence and also to do with products. And hopefully those of you on the call are starting to pick up some of those themes around constructing an award and looking at how some of the mistakes to avoid, etc. You should be taking this advice and absolutely applying it to the concept of how do I stand out as salesperson of the year, or how does this particular product that we've developed and launched stand out and be product of the year within this piece of category. So I kind of just did want to reiterate that. I am going to revert back to, we've had another question submitted, and I quite like this one as well, but I'd love the panel to perhaps share some of their most memorable moments from judging, or some of the most memorable entries or campaigns that they've kind of, or individual awards, etc. That they've had through their own judging, your own judging experiences. And let's go with Sebastian.
I was afraid you were going to go for me first.
It's a tough one.
I've been ever since that question came up, I've been letting it rattle around in the back of my mind. And I'm afraid I was recently on a judging panel, and the winning award was so good, the campaign is actually going to go live. And so I'm actually under NDA, and that's the only one I can think of that actually stands out, because the leap of creativity to get from the problem to this is the solution is so strong and so clear, but also only clear after that leap's been made. So that importance of creativity is what I would highlight in there. And I'm afraid I can't give any more detail than that.
I think a very creative answer, frankly. There was this one, I'm NDA'd, can't remember it.
Simon, I promise you I'll email it to you once it goes live, and you'll understand.
Simon, you've been involved in enormous amounts of awards, right? There must be some stories that you aren't beholden to NDA, or memorable moments that you would share, or memorable work that you'd call out.
I'm going to be honest. I have judged a lot of awards, and I can't remember. I mean, there's a lot of great awards I've written. I'm sorry, not written, read. I've been involved in. Well, I've written a few, but no, I can't remember. I honestly can't. I do remember this is a contest. I think David touched on this. You're normally in a badly lit hotel lobby with bad food. That's what I recall from judging. So that's a good context for why writing an interesting entry is helpful. Yeah, that's a good point. David, were you going to add something, mate?
Look, it is a tough question. I'll sort of slightly cheat and say one of the awards papers that isn't a New Zealand or Australian based one that I've read, but I didn't read it as a judge, but is available on Walk, World Advertising Resource Centre. But you should be able to find it anywhere in a number of different places. Is John Lewis's Monty the Penguin entry for the Cannes Creative Effectiveness. So Cannes, or Cannes, as they say locally. If you win an award at Cannes, then the following year you can enter the same paper as an effectiveness paper. And the paper that was written as Adam and Eve DDB out of the UK to win the Grand Prix, I think it was the year before last, it is a masterclass in awards writing. It does everything that we've talked about. It is really clear. It is really enjoyable. It's really easy to read, brilliantly structured. The data points that they bring in are really unique. They're not expected, but they are really kind of constructed for the story, and it works really, really well. So if you can find John Lewis Monty the Penguin awards paper, go and read that, and that should be a reference point for everyone. Locally, it's funny. I mean, I'll say, I don't know if Q was involved or you were involved, but FCB's paper on the Grim Reaper, I think 2 years ago, was really nicely written. Swim Reaper, sorry. That's how memorable it is. No, and I'll be honest. I mean, like, in a good way. No, it's a really good. It's a well written paper, and I think what it does really well is, again, tonality. Like the writing of the paper kind of matches and reflects the tone and the ambition of the work. So if you can try and, as a local reference point, I think that's good, and bringing up people on the panel. And there was going to be one other. I think we shouldn't really be name checking so much, but Clemenger and Wellington obviously have a number of social cause papers that they do, and I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, might have been the Seconds. Do you remember the Seconds ad? the two guys, one guy's pulling out in the middle of the road and another guy's coming along and he's going too fast.
Yeah.
They get out of the car and they have a conversation. Oh, mistakes. That's it. Sorry, it's called mistakes. If you can find that, you might have to look on maybe Comms Council, I'm not sure, sites, but you know, that's a well-written, that's a social, it's really hard when you're doing sort of road safety and things like that, to overcome the fact that, you know, it's kind of hard to prove your behavioural effect. It's kind of hard to prove that people have slowed down across New Zealand, but I think they do a pretty good job at kind of trying to get you through that by using all of the methods that we've talked about here, really simple, clear, enjoyable read, trying to bolster the paper with relevant data points. So it's actually quite a comprehensive answer in the end, wasn't it?
It was, thank you, mate. Hey, look, we've just had another question come in from Reese here, which I think is a good one as well. And again, I'll probably read this one verbatim. It's been mentioned the entry word count of 1,200 is relatively short. If someone can submit a good entry, meeting the criteria as discussed, in less words, would a shorter entry be noticed by judges and potentially penalised?
No, it wouldn't be penalised. And if you can get your story across shorter, great.
Good on you. Yeah.
Almost recommended.
Yeah.
Encouraged to.
Well, I don't know about encouraged. I think it comes to what David was talking about from confidence earlier. It's a real demonstration of confidence. I have completely answered this. It's an amazing piece of work and it's completely clear all the way through. If you do that and you deliver that in well under the word count, go ahead. But if you've got a bad award or a bad entry, you're not going to make it better by making it 600 words.
Yeah, I think the word count isn't a target. It's just don't go over this. It's not saying write 1,200 words.
Yeah, I think at the point earlier about context of judges reading, you know, 12 to 20, I think it's 12 to 15, I think is roughly the target for judges. So, you know, you can do the math. That's 100,000 words. That's a novel nearly, I don't know, or short story, short novella that people are reading. So, you know, it is actually quite welcome when people don't treat the word count as a, you know, they're not aiming to get there and like they're coming in short. That is actually kind of quite a relief sometimes. It does raise, can I just make a couple of quick technical points? Because in technical writing, it is really, the word count thing is really important on a 1,200 word entry. There's a lot of resources online that I would recommend people do go and look at in terms of how to manage word count. You'd be amazed at actually how much kind of fluff you naturally put in, even when you think you're being really kind of precise. There are word count, you know, things like using apostrophes instead of, you know, it is, it's, you know, the simple things like that you will miss. So technically there is a lot of advice and support online around reducing word count. And then the other thing is to think about is the difference between passive and active language. Again, you'll find stuff about this online, but passive language was something like the bone was eaten by the dog. Active language is the dog ate the bone. I think there's 7 words to 5 words. I know this seems like a really odd point, but being more active, you know, the results, you know, we did well, that's too facile, but you know, just really think about that tone and that style and whether you are kind of framing your sentences in too soft and fat a way, and whether you can just be a little bit more blunt and direct. Naturally, we write awards papers like we're writing emails a lot of the time, and so we kind of want to soften it and things like that. But you really don't have that luxury, and judges aren't going to be offended if you're just really blunt and to the point.
I think that's the key. Sorry. I think that's the key point in starting early. It's great if you chop out your first edit and it's 1,000 words, but what you'll probably find is your first edit is 1,600 words. And as the old French mathematician Blaise Pascal said, I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a shorter one. To go from 1,500 words to 1,200 is really hard. So if you, as the question went, if you can write it short, great. But you'll probably find most of the time you're over word limit, and then you'll spend weeks trying to have the same sentiment with taking 300 or 400 words out, and that's not as easy as it sounds.
I guess that's also the importance of the rewrite process, right? And the additional eyeballs is that's what can really help refine that. Hey, look, I'm just looking at the little clock on the bottom of my computer here, and it's saying 9:59. So I think we're probably going to be wrapping this up. But hey, look, just from me, I wanted to thank you all for your time and for your candidness and what you were able to share. I mean, you're all leaders in this industry, and I think it's incredibly valuable to get some of that advice. Potentially some of you will be on the judging panel for these awards. So yeah, just from me, and I guess on behalf of the IAB, just a huge thank you to all of you for your time. Jill, I will pass over to you if you'd like to close.
On mute.
Thanks very much, James, and thanks everybody for your engagement today, each of you as experts and panellists. We've seen almost 100% engagement in terms of registrations versus activations today, which is fabulous. It gives some sort of indication as to the interest in the awards this year. We've seen good questions coming through from the panel. What we'll be doing between now and Tuesday is summarising the session in a Word format and be sending it out as an EDM. So you'll be able to just have a quick update and a reference check to what you have seen today. But just one very last reminder that there was a bit of talk today about the word count. The word count for the entries is 1,200 words. However, that excludes the entry summary of 150 words. So in total, that's 1,350. But the agency of the year is an exception with a 2,000 word count and an entry summary of 150. But thanks everybody for checking in today, and thanks again to our panellists. See you.
Thank you all very much.